Good evening, everyone. Today we will be doing personality unit 5, that is psychodynamic theory. So there are a couple of, psychologists we will be dealing with, that is Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory, and then Karen Horney's social foundation of personality, as well as Sullivan's interpersonal theory. So there are certain things which we have already learned in cognitive psychology, which we will be dealing even today. And there are new concepts which we will be learning. So whatever things what I discussed, initially, that will actually continue till the end of the chapter. So be focused, because I'm going to ask you questions in every 10 minutes and I need answers, right answers. Okay, let's begin. So many psychologists have proposed theories that try to explain the origins of personality. And one highly influential set of theories stems from the work of Austrian neurologist, that is Sigmund Freud, who first proposed the theory of psychoanalysis. Collectively, these theories are known as psychodynamic theories. Theories of Sigmund Freud is known as psychodynamic theories. In the late 1800s and early 90s, Freud developed a technique he termed psychoanalysis and used it to treat mental disorders. Freud did not develop his theory on the basis of scientific experiments such as correlation and control studies. He used the case study method and formed his theory of psychoanalysis by observing his patients through what? Through case study method and by observing his patients. According to psychoanalytic theory, everything we do is motivated by inner unconscious forces. So everything, whatever we do, again, it is motivated. You're not simply doing it. So you have this inner motivation, unconscious forces, which is making you do things. Personalities arise because of attempts to resolve conflicts between unconscious sexual and aggressive impulses and societal demands to restrain these impulses. The main basic principle of his study suggested that adult personality is the result of an interaction between innate drives, that is, your inner drives, such as the desire for pleasure and early experience. Freud proposed that individual personality differences can be traced back to the way the early conflicts between desire and experience were handled. These conflicts remain with the adult and exert pressure through unconsciously motivated behavior. Even though most of his ideas have been abandoned by modern psychology, his psychoanalytic theory formed the basis for many current psychodynamic theories, and they all emphasize unconscious motives and desires, as well as the importance of childhood experiences in shaping personality. See, in this particular line, what do we, learn? It's all about unconscious, and childhood experiences. So that also, very important in shaping a person's personality. Freud's psychoanalytic theory is described in the following three headings. One is structure of theory. Second, dynamics of personality. Third is development of personality. So basically, the entire Freud psychoanalytic theory revolves around these three concepts, that is structure of personality. Let us see what is the structure of personality here. In order to describe the structure of personality, the following two models have been developed by Freud. Here there are two models, that is topographical model and dynamic or structural model. What is topographical model here? State of consciousness. So I'm sure that all of you have heard of the words called conscious, unconscious, subconscious, right? So Freud developed a topographical model of the mind whereby he described the features of the mind's structure and function. Freud used the analogy of an iceberg to describe the three levels of the mind, how the mind works. Freud believed that there were three levels of consciousness. First is the conscious contains all the information that a person is paying attention to at any given time. So what is consciousness? Now, while I'm teaching, you're all conscious, you're all aware. Why? Because I told you I'm going to ask you questions. Otherwise, would you people be aware? No, I don't think so. But I doubt some people might be still sleeping. That is consciousness, that you're aware of what is happening around you. Second, pre-conscious. The pre-conscious contains all the information outside of a person's attention, but readily available if required. Third, the unconscious, not conscious, unconscious. Conscious, you're aware. Unconscious, you're not aware. The unconscious contains thoughts, feelings, desires, and memories of which people have no awareness, but that influences every aspect of their day-to-day lives. So whatever your thoughts, it comes like you don't know, you're not thinking about something, but just comes, with you don't want it to happen, but it's just happening because everything is there in your unconscious mind. Your feelings, your desires, your memories, it's all there in your unconscious mind. Freud used this mental map of the mind to describe the degree to which mental events such as thoughts and fantasies vary in accessibility to awareness. He believed that information in the unconscious emerges in slips of the tongue, jokes, dreams, illness symptoms, and the associations people make between ideas. So when somebody is saying something, we'll be like, hey, just kidding. So they are not kidding. It's just that it's the inner feeling, which even they might not be aware of it. Dynamic or structural model. So first model, what we learned is structure of personality. Again, that has two models. The first is topographical model. Second is dynamic. So we learned topographical model that has conscious, pre-conscious, and unconscious. Now second model, that is dynamic or structural model. In terms of the above three stages of consciousness, Freud attempted to explain a great deal of mental functioning, but later he found it useful to describe a kind of mental map involving three regions of type of mental activity. These three elements of personality known as the id, the ego, and the superego work together to create complex human behavior. So kindly forget the word, the meaning or the definition, whatever we learned otherwise, ego. So here it is completely different. So we will be learning of three new concepts in personality, that is id, the ego, and superego. What is it? Anybody has got any idea?
It's an instinct.
Okay.
Like instinct or like animal-like instinct in human.
Okay, yes. So it is like the demanding child in the family. Suppose you have your siblings or anybody else, if you know any siblings or any child who is a demanding child, right? Here, the primary region is id here, the part of the personality present at birth. So this id is nothing but at the time of your birth, you have personality. That is id. This deals with immediate gratification of primitive needs, that is your initial needs, your sexual desires, aggressive impulses, and it is ruled by pleasure principle, is located in the unconscious mind, not subconscious. It is located in unconscious mind. The energy for its instincts come from the libido. I want to do that now. There's an exclamation, which means he's commanding it, he just doesn't want to listen. So that is it. The second is superego. Now, what is superego? It is like judging. The third region, that is called superego, it is created by ego. See, it's created by ego to assist in interacting with the outside world. So if you have to interact, if you have to be social, you have to live with the society. So the superego is important here. So this plays an important role here because it helps you, it assists you in interacting with the outside world. What helps you? Superego begins to emerge at around age 5. So when you're age 5, that's when this emerges. Earlier, see, when child, an infant, right? He wants to drink milk. He wants to drink milk. He doesn't listen. You have mother as a mother or as a father. You need to fulfill his demands until age 5. So when that, When the child reaches age 5, he starts understanding. He knows how to interact with the world, how to live with the world, how to live with the people. Contains the taboos implemented by parents and of societies, deals with the ideals as well, provides guidelines for making decisions, represents the societal demands and ideals, and it is ruled by morality principle here. Is located in the conscious mind. Why conscious? Conscious talks about awareness. Now the child is aware of what he's doing, but an infant who is not even 5 will not be aware. That's why it is located in unconscious mind there. And ego, what is ego now? It is like, the manager kind, somebody who is managing between it and superego, something moderate. The second region is the ego. It is created by it to manage frustration caused by interaction with the outside world. So what happens in it? It is nothing but like a demanding child. He doesn't want to listen. He's just demanding and he wants the things to happen. It is like a CEO, in a company. Or if you take an example of a school, it is like principal. So there is a demand from the principal that teacher needs to fulfill these duties, doesn't care how, but the teacher needs to do it, but the manager needs to do it. So that manager or the teacher is nothing but here ego. So it is created by it to manage frustration that is caused by the interaction with the outside world. So there is a pressure from the CEO or the principal, and now he needs to manage between it and superego. And its purpose is to deal with reality to meet the demands of the id, that is CEO or the principal, if possible. So there are certain demands by the CEO or the principal. Now, the manager needs to fulfill these demands at the same time, like meeting with the reality. Acts as a mediator between the id and the superego, who? The teacher or the manager. It tries to maximize pleasure and minimize pain and is ruled by reality principle. He does not live in, some personification era or something. He knows what things are. It's like principle just demands you, okay, by tomorrow you have to complete 10 chapters. If she instructs a teacher, that's not possible. The teacher knows that it's just not possible, right? Because that's how it is located in the conscious, pre-conscious, and unconscious mind. What? Ego. Ego is located in conscious, pre-conscious, and unconscious mind, whereas it is located in unconscious mind and superego is located in conscious mind. In a nutshell, the it creates the demands. The ego adds the needs of the reality, and the superego adds morality to the action which is taken. The outcome of the combination of all the three determinants shapes an adult personality. Give me a second. Thank you. Okay, so now we will talk if the it becomes the dominant structure, what happens? Or if the superego becomes the dominant structure, what happens? See, if the it becomes the dominant structure, the demanding child, what will happen? The person will be narcissist, right? And if the superego becomes the dominant structure, what happens? The person will become rigid, inflexible, and guilt-ridden, always carrying some guilt. He becomes submissive. Now let us, see the differentiation between id, ego, and superego quickly. Id express sexual and aggressive instincts. Ego mediates between desires of the id and demands of the superego. Superego represents conscience and the rules of society, follow internalized moral standards. Id entirely unconscious. Ego partly conscious and partly unconscious, as well as pre-conscious. Superego partly conscious and mostly unconscious. Id present at birth. Ego starts from the age of 5. Now that was superego. Id represent biological aspect. Ego represents psychological aspect. Superego represents societal and parental aspect. Id, pleasure. Ego, reality. Superego, morality. Now let's learn dynamics of personality. Freud human organism is a complex system in which relies on both physiological energy as well as psychic energy. Physical energy is used in physical activities like running, writing, respiration, etc. Of course, you don't need physical energy to think. Psychic Psychic energy is used in psychological work such as planning, thinking, feeling, and remembering. According to Freud, it is the contact point of these two types of energy. What kind of energy? Physical as well as psychic energy. So it is the contact point of these two energies. Related to these energies, Freud developed some concepts which explain the dynamic aspects of personality like instinct, anxiety, and mental mechanisms. And according to Freud, two biological instincts make up the id, that is, eros and thanatos. Eros is the Greek word for love. Thanatos is the Greek word for death. Eros is life instinct. The purpose of Eros is to establish and preserve unity through relationship. It is related with hunger, thirst, security, and the important sex necessary for producing new generation, and is associated with positive emotions such as love and hence pro-social behavior, cooperation, collaboration, and other behaviors that support harmonious societies. Whereas Thanos, the purpose of Thanos' instinct is to undo connections and unity. It is like detachment. It doesn't want to keep any connections. A destructive force. It is what? Thanos is a destructive force directing towards death. It motivates all kind of hatred, aggression, violence, war, and suicide. Thanos is associated with negative emotions such as fear, hate, and anger, which led to anti-social acts from bullying to murder. And these two instincts can either operate against each other through repulsion or combine with each other through attraction. Now next we'll go to defense mechanism. What is defense mechanism? Freud believed id, ego, and superego are in constant conflict as the primary goal is different for each piece. Sometimes, when the conflict is too much for a person to handle, his or her ego may engage in one or many defense mechanisms to protect the individual. Defense mechanisms are a part of our everyday life. Anything happens, we try to defend ourselves, right? Be it an argument or anything. So it is part of our everyday life. Psychoanalysis emphasize that the use of defense mechanism is a normal part of personality function and not itself a sign of psychological disorder. This is not a psychological disorder. This is part of everybody's personality. This process is usually unconscious and helps ward off unpleasant feelings like anxiety or help the individual to feel better and look at the positive side of life. Now, these defense mechanisms include denial, repression. Kindly pay attention here because these these words will be used throughout the chapter. The first is denial, second is repression, third regression, fourth reaction formation, fourth projection, next rationalization, next intellectualization, next displacement and sublimation. Now, what is denial? Somebody who is not accepting the reality is in a denial state, right? Not acknowledging that there is a problem. Now there is a COVID. Some people are still in denial, though it's been almost 2 years. And then, especially in Surat, people are not wearing masks. Yesterday, my sister and I had been out for shopping, and only two of us wearing masks. It felt like only both of us are the ones who are afraid of COVID and no one else. Or maybe this is a COVID-free zone or something like that. Yeah, so people are in denial. They're not believing. For example, smokers may refuse to admit to themselves that smoking is bad for their health. Yeah, so wearing mask is bad for health. Their health is what some people believe. That is denial. Not accepting the reality is denial. Second, repression. What is repression? Not regression, repression. Keeping unacceptable thoughts or traumatic events buried in the unconscious mind. So suppose you have some negative memories, back, like I think childhood memories or anything, and you don't want to think about it, you don't want to recall those, something that you have buried deep down, you don't want to recall, that is repression. You have suppressed those negative emotions, negative memories. Third is regression, acting in a way that is not typical for your age. For example, a child who knows how to walk starts to crawl around because their baby brother is getting so much attention for crawling. Next, reaction formation. What is it? It is behaving in a way that is exactly the opposite of one's true feelings. For example, you would have, I don't know if you have experience, but that is how it is. Suppose you like somebody, during your adolescence or during your college days, and you tend to fight with that person, and it's like you're not accepting the reality that you like that person. In fact, you show it to him or the others that you hate him or her. So you're behaving the opposite of your true feelings. So you have some feelings, but you're behaving the other way. So behaving in a way that is exactly the opposite of one's true feeling. What is now next is projection. What is projection? Placing one's own unacceptable thoughts onto others. For example, a man who has committed adultery is convinced his wife cheating on him despite lack of evidence. So though it's like an accusation, though you don't have an evidence, you're still accusing someone. Next is rationalization. That is making up acceptable excuses for unacceptable behavior. For example, justifying cheating on an exam by saying that everyone else cheats. Yeah. So if 10 people are cheating, you're the 11th person, you're like, everybody's cheating, I'm also cheating. That is rationalization, being practical, right? That's what you should do. Next, intellectualization. What is it? It is block the emotional side and address only the facts. So you're keeping your emotional or the personal things aside and being rational or practical, and you're focusing only on the facts now. For example, the person who finds his or her partner has cancer deals with it by becoming an absolute expert on cancer and focuses on the disease intellectually rather than dealing with the emotions. Of course, you will not leave the person and walk out, right? There is a problem. That person has to be wise enough to know how to deal with it now. So that is intellectualization. Third, next, displacement. What is it? It is transferring negative emotion to a less threatening target. For example, a person who is angry with the boss comes home and yells at the spouse. It's basically transferring of your emotions. So if you have a positive emotion, you meet somebody, your energy is transferring there. Similarly, if you have a negative emotion, negative feeling, you meet somebody, again, you're transferring the emotions to whoever you meet, whoever you are with. Next is sublimation. What is it? Transforming unacceptable thought or needs into acceptable actions. For example, a person may turn to becoming a boxing player to deal with aggression. So basically, it is like channelizing your energy, sublimation. I would repeat, first is denial, that is not accepting the reality. Second is repression, keeping unacceptable thoughts or suppressing your negative emotions or memories. Next is regression. It is like acting in a way that is not typical of your age. So if you're older, you age like a kid. You act like a kid. Sometimes you would have heard your parents say, "Okay, behave like an adult," right? So next is reaction formation, behaving in a way that is exactly the opposite of one's true feelings. Next is projection, placing one's own unacceptable thoughts onto others. Next is rationalization, making up acceptable excuses for unacceptable behavior. Next is intellectualization, being rational, being practical. Next, displacement, transferring negative emotion to a less threatening target. Next, sublimation, it's like channelizing your energies or thoughts or anything. Transforming unacceptable thought or needs into acceptable actions. Intellectualization is also being objective. Next is development of personality. How does the personality develop? Very interesting. Freud believed that personality developed through a series of childhood stages in which the pleasure-seeking energies of the id becomes focused on certain erogenous areas. These are called psychosexual stages because each stage represents the fixation of libido on a different area of the body. As a person grows physically, certain areas of the body become important as sources of potential frustration, pleasures, or both. This psychosexual energy or libido was described as a driving force behind behavior. See, there are certain stages that is oral, age 0 to 1. So where is the focus here? Pleasure centers on the mouth, sucking, biting, chewing. So any child 0 to 1, the most important or fascinating or the most important thing for them is like, drinking the milk or chewing, biting himself, his nails or whatever. And the pleasure focuses on bowel and bladder. Next, anal, 1 to 3 years. Here the focus is on elimination, coping with demands for control. Next is phallic, 6 to years. So what is the focus here is on? That is pleasure zone here is the genitals, coping with insensuous sexual feelings. Next, latency, that is 6 to 12 years. Here dormant sexual feelings begin. Next, genital, that is 12 plus years. Maturation of sexual interest starts taking place. And let's learn a little in detail. I think all of us have gone through this during lifespan, but quick recap. Oral, that is 0 to 1, what happens? During this oral stage, the infant's primary source of interaction occurs through the mouth, so the rooting and sucking reflex is especially important. The mouth is vital for eating, and the infant derives pleasure from oral stimulation through gratifying activities such as tasting and sucking. Next, anal, that is 1 to 3 years of age. During the anal stage, Freud believed that the primary focus of the libido was on controlling bladder and bowel movements. Because 1 to 3 years, you can't just go, shit anywhere and everywhere. The major conflict at this stage is toilet training. Is very important at this stage. The child has to learn to control his or her bodily needs. Developing this control leads to a sense of accomplishment and independence. Not just independence, and even your parents feel happy. They can at least go and pee aram se. Next, phallic, 3 to 6 years of age. Freud suggested that during this phallic age, the primary focus of the libido is on the genitals. At this stage, children also begin to discover the differences between males and females. According to Freud, preschoolers begin to struggle with sexual desires toward the opposite sex parent, boys to mothers and girls to fathers. That's how the attachment is during this age. For boys, this is called the Oedipus complex, involving a boy's desire for his mother and his urge to replace his father, who is seen as a threat. And same goes with the girls. It is the opposite case here. Girl towards father. Next is latency, that is 6 to 12 years of age. During this stage, the superego continues to develop while its energies are suppressed. So the demanding child, now it is converted to somebody who is an understanding child. Now it is replaced by superego. Children develop social skills, values, and relationships with peers and adults outside the family as well. Next, genital, that is 12 plus years of age. During the final stage of psychosexual development, the individual develops a strong sexual interest for the opposite sex. This stage begins during puberty but lasts throughout life. Freud also hypothesized that an individual must successfully complete each stage to become a psychologically healthy adult with a fully formed ego and superego. Otherwise, individuals may become stuck or fixated in a particular stage, causing emotional and behavioral problems in adulthood. And regression can also occur if adults. What is regression? What did we learn? Not acting your age. Regression can also occur if adults experience stressful situations. He believed that both fixation and regression play important roles in determining adult personality. So each stage is very important. It's not that you have to skip one, you have to go to the other, you have to jump, nothing like that. Next, evaluation of Freud's theory. There are some merits and demerits in Freud's theory. Let us go through the merits first. It is a complete theory of personality and explains behavior. It emphasizes the role of unconscious and early childhood experiences. It emphasizes dynamic nature of behavior. It emphasizes on defense mechanisms of ego and stimulates further theoretical research work in personality. It also results in a serious interest in psychological treatment of mental disorders. Very important. It results in serious interest in psychological treatment of mental disorders. Limitations. What were the limitations in his theory? Let's see. Critics point out that many of Freud's ideas were not new, which means he also, took it from someone else, and that many aspects of his theory are not testable. Some critics argue that psychodynamic theories are not falsifiable and therefore unscientific. It can be, which means it can be proven wrong. Critics also contended that Freud's theory is lacking in empirical evidence and relies too heavily on therapeutic achievements. Others criticize his use of biased data in developing his theory. He was not objective, which means while collecting data. Other critics argue that psychodynamic theories are made by generalizing from a small number of patients to the whole human population. Relying only on case studies can lead to faulty conclusions. Of course, this should not be the only method adopted. There is little evidence of many of Freud's theories, such as the repression of childhood sexual abuse and trauma. Freud's theory overemphasized the unconscious mind, sex, aggression, and childhood experiences. There is lack of scientific proof in the theory. Freud paid little to no attention to the impact of environment, sociology, or culture. It has generally not been supported across cultures and may actually apply only on Western culture, which means it cannot be applied, be applied in all the cultures. So we have learned about Sigmund Freud so far. Any doubts? Because I don't think we need any summary. If you people have understood.
Yes, Ritu.
All good with Sigmund Freud?
Yep.
Okay, let's move to Karen. What, Praveen? Come again?
Yeah, all good. So I think he has got a lot of case study based theories, which seems to be interesting. But yeah, I mean.
Yes, and by observing people. Yeah, but then if you just adapt one method, again, the data, what you get is not sufficient. Anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, interesting to know that just using case studies, how exactly theory can be found. But
he's one of the most famous persons.
Yeah, I know.
Yes. The next, we will move on to Karen Horney, Social Foundation of Personality, One Woman Army. Okay. Karen Horney's psychoanalytic social theory assumes that social and cultural conditions, especially during childhood, have a powerful effect on later personality. So your social culture, where you are born or where you're brought up, so that also plays very important during your childhood, especially the kind of effect you had. Your culture, that plays a very important role in a person's life, and that also shapes their personality. In a personality theory, Horney reformulated Freudian thought and presented a holistic, humanistic perspective that emphasized cultural and social influences, human growth, and the achievement of self-actualization. Horney's theories can be explained under three headings, that is basic anxiety, neurotic needs, theory of the self. So basically it deals with three things. Basic anxiety, what is it? All children need safety and security, but these can be gained only by love from parents. Every child needs love from their parents. Unfortunately, parents often neglect, dominate, reject, overindulge their children, conditions that lead to the child's feelings of basic hostility towards parents. If children repress basic hostility, they will develop feelings of insecurity. If they're not provided love, care, attention, there's a lot of insecurity in the child. He feels helpless, and he becomes vulnerable, and pervasive sense of apprehension called anxiety. In order for children to develop normally, they need to experience both genuine love and discipline, not just one aspect. Such experiences provide them with feelings of safety and satisfaction that lets them grow in accord with their real self. So a child needs both genuine love from the parents as well as he needs to be disciplined. If these needs are not met, the child develops basic hostility towards their parents. And repressed hostility leads to profound feelings of insecurity and a vague sense of apprehension called basic anxiety. Both basic hostility and basic anxiety are intimately interwoven, interconnected. Horney also listed the adverse factors, that is, unfavorable factors of the environment that cause basic anxiety. All these adverse factors are termed by Horney as basic evil. These factors are direct or indirect domination, erratic behavior, lack of respect for child's individual needs, lack of real guidance, disparaging attitudes, too much admiration or absence of it, lack of reliable warmth, having to take sides in the parental disagreements, too much or too little responsibility, overprotection, isolation from other children, injustice, discrimination, unkept promise, hostile atmosphere. So all these things of whenever a parent does know, the child has a very bad effect on him or her. So parents need to be really careful. The basic evil experienced by the child naturally provokes resentment or basic hostility. It produces a dilemma or conflict for the child because expressing the hostility would risk punishment and would lead to withdrawal of his or her receipt of parental love. Children deal with their hostility by repressing it. Regardless of cause, the regression exacerbates the conflicts, leading to a vicious cycle. The anxiety produces an excessive need for affection. So if the child is very anxious, no, he actually needs to be loved. He needs to be cared. When these needs are not met, the child feels rejected and the anxiety and hostility intensify at this stage. So we learned basic anxiety. Next, we will move on to neurotic needs. What is neurotic needs here? Horney identified 10 categories of neurotic needs that mark neurotics in their attempt to reduce basic anxiety. And later, Horney grouped these 10 neurotic needs into 3 basic neurotic trends which apply to both normal and neurotic individuals in their attempt to solve basic conflict. These are all natural human needs. The major difference is that neurotic people take them to extreme. So all the things, whatever we are going to learn is all very normal for everybody. But when the all the emotions or anything becomes extreme, intensify, that's when is the problem. These 10 neurotic needs can be classified into 3 broad categories. First is moving toward people. What is moving toward people here? It's compliance, self-effacing solution. These neurotic needs cause individuals to seek affirmation and acceptance from others and are often described as needy or clingy as they seek out approval and love. So whenever the child does something, he always needs affirmation from somebody, parents or anybody, which means he is in need of love. Whenever you see the child always needs approval of anything, no, he's not confident. People pleasers need affection and approval at any cost. Overly dependent people need a partner to take care over their life. They pathologically fear being abandoned by their partner all the time. Those with the need to restrict their lives appear to lack ambition. Life is experienced in safe and inconspicuous ways. Most children facing parental indifference use this strategy. They often have a fear of helplessness and abandonment, or what Horney referred to as basic anxiety. That was moving towards people. Any doubt here? Okay. Moving against people. We'll learn moving towards people. Now moving against people. What happens here? Aggression or expansive solution. These neurotic needs create hostility and antisocial behavior, not social, antisocial, they were antisocial. These individuals are often described as cold, indifferent, and aloof. They want to distance themselves from the entire world. So that is moving against people. They don't like people. They dislike people. A neurotic need for power is the craving of power and strength for its own sake. Individuals with a neurotic need to exploit others believe that they can only achieve success by taking advantage of others, which means they do nothing to improve themselves, but they want to put down others and come up in life. Neurotic need for social recognition or prestige is expressed when people build their self-esteem on the recognition and compliments they receive from others. A neurotic need for personal admiration means that people desire admiration and have an inflated self-image dependent upon this approval. Yes, I had a friend. Like, even if you say that you're looking beautiful, before leaving the office, just for in 10 minutes, she would ask me 100 times, how am I looking, or am I looking good? So at one point of time, you get frustrated. So that's how it is. The neurotic need for personal achievement derives from a person's sense of insecurity. They seek superiority in order to prove their worth. Neurotic children or adults within this category often exhibit anger or basic hostility to those around them. That is, there is a need for power, a need for control and exploitation, and a maintenance of a pretense or supremacy. Although their motivation is the same as that of the compliant type, to alleviate these basic anxiety, aggressive personalities never display fear of rejection. They act tough and domineering and have no regard for others or no concern for others. Moving away from people. So we learned moving towards people, moving against people, now moving away from people, not against, moving away from people. That is your withdrawal or resigning solution. These neurotic needs result in hostility and a need to control other people. These individuals are often described as difficult, domineering, and unkind people. How do you identify? Those who need independence seek freedom from commitment. This need usually follows a disappointing relationship here. With the need for perfection comes the fear of failure and criticism. These people try to hide their flaws to protect their image of infallibility. As neither aggression nor compliance solve parental indifference, Horney recognized that children might move away from other people to maintain an emotional distance. They must not love, hate, or cooperate with others or become involved in any way. To achieve this total detachment, they strive to become self-sufficient. Any doubt so far? Good morning.
Good morning.
We are good, Ritu. Continue.
Okay. It is important to note that well-adjusted individuals utilize all three of these strategies. So all of us have got a little touch of everything. Again, it depends how you want to utilize. Shifting focus depending on internal and external factors relating to people. But neurotics are compelled to rigidly rely on only one. So if you find one person, like, out of these three things, that is moving towards people, moving against people, moving away from people, and they have got all the characteristics, you can categorize them under one of these categories. Otherwise, all of us have got all kinds of things. The neurotic needs come into existence because of a person's intensive and compulsive pursuit of their satisfaction as the only way to resolve basic anxiety. Satisfying these needs will not help feel safe and secure, but will aid only in desire to escape the discomfort caused by anxiety. We pursue gratification of these needs solely to cope with anxiety. We tend to focus on only one need and compulsively seek its satisfaction in all the situations prevailing. Next, we will move on to theory of the self. So far, we learned basic anxiety and neurotic needs under Karen Horney's social foundation of personality, right? So now we will move on to the third and the last, that is theory of the self. It is about yourself. Horney had one more way of looking at neurosis in terms of self-images. For Horney, the self is the core of one's being, their potential. If a person is healthy, they would have an accurate conception of who they are, and they would then feel free to realize their true self or self-realization or their true potential. The neurotic has a different view of things. The neurotic self is split into a despised self and an ideal self. So they are trying, they are like struggling between this despised self and ideal self. So despised self is nothing but what they are. What is ideal self? That is what they want to be. So basically they are struggling between these two. As a result, neurotic individuals feel that they somehow do not live up to the ideal self. And that ideal self, God only knows what it is. Now, what is real self? Let us just have a quick look. The real self is who and what we actually are. That is the real self, your true real self, only you know it. The real self has the potential for growth, happiness, willpower, realization of gifts, etc., etc., etc. What is ideal self? The ideal self is a type of person we feel what we should be. So in that race, you're not being yourself. The ideal self is used as a model to assist the real self in developing its potential and achieving self-actualization. The real self and the ideal self actually are the two sides of the same coin. Neurotic person's self is split between an idealized self and real self. Based on realistic appraisal of abilities, potential, and working, that is real self. It is also based on flexible, dynamic, adapts as the individual develops and changes, or it functions as a goal and encourages growth. In ideal self, what happens? It is based on unattainable ideal of absolute perfection. So there is something called perfection, which nobody knows. So they are always striving towards that. Unattainable, it's like one aim which can never be achieved. It is static, inflexible, and unyielding. The person is simply struggling for no reason. And also it hinders growth by demanding rigid adherence. You have to follow the rules no matter if you die. So that is ideal self. They feel that there is a flaw somewhere in comparison to what they should be. The goals set out by the neurotic ideal self are not realistic or even possible. The despised self, on the other hand, has the feeling that it is despised by those around them and assumes that this incarnation is its true self. Thus, the neurotic is like a clock's pendulum, oscillating between a fallacious perfection and a manifestation of self-hate. Horney referred to this phenomenon as the tyranny of the shoals, and the neurotic's hopeless search for glory, which they will never find. The compliant person believes I should be sweet, self-sacrificing, saintly. The aggressive person believes I should be powerful, recognized, and winner. The withdrawing person believes I should be independent, aloof, and perfect. And she concluded that these ingrained traits of the psyche forever prevent an individual's potential from being actualized unless the cycle of neurosis is somehow broken through treatment or otherwise. Evaluation. Karen Horney made significant contribution to humanism, self-psychology, psychoanalysis, and feminine psychology. Her refutation of Freud's theories about women generated more interest in the psychology of women. Horney does not account for the whole of human psychology, since like every theorist, she described only part of the picture. Of course, the entire picture cannot be described by anybody. Horney acknowledged and agreed with Freud on many issues. She was also critical of him on several key beliefs. Freud's notion of Oedipal complex and Venus envy was subjected to criticism by Horney, claiming that clinging to one parent and jealousy of the other was simply the result of anxiety. caused by a disturbance in the parent-child relationship. Despite these variances with the prevalent Freudian view, Horney strove to reformulate Freudian thought and represent them in a holistic and humanitarian view of the individual psyche, which placed much emphasis on cultural and social differences worldwide. So, she also took inspiration from Freud. She also made some changes and focused mainly on women's psychology. She took interest in that, feminine psychology. The major negative comment that has been made about Horney's theory is that her theory is limited to the neurotic. Yes, it is talking about neurotic alone. A theory rates very low in generating research and low on its ability to be falsified, to organizing data and to serve as a useful guide to action. And her theory is rated about average on internal consistency and parsimony. Any doubts so far? If not, we will move on to the last person, that is Sullivan's theory of personality. Any doubt?
No, please continue, Ritu.
Okay. So the last person is Sullivan's theory of personality. Harry Stack Sullivan was the first American theorist to construct a comprehensive personality theory in which he believed that development of the personality occurred within the context of the social group. So according to him, the personality is developing in the context of social group. Without other people, Sullivan contended humans would have no personality. Of course, people are playing and shaping your personality. You cannot just stay at home and then there is no personality. A personality can never be isolated from the complex of interpersonal relations in which the person lives and has been living. Sullivan insisted that knowledge of human personality can be gained only through the scientific study of interpersonal relations. His interpersonal theory emphasizes the importance of various developmental stages. What were the developmental stages? Infancy, childhood, juvenile era, pre-adolescence, early adolescence, late adolescence, and adulthood. Healthy human development rests on a person's ability to establish intimacy with another person, but unfortunately, anxiety can interfere with these, with satisfying interpersonal relations at any age. Sullivan believed that people achieve healthy development when they are able to experience both intimacy and lust toward the same other person, not with two different feelings with two different people. Sullivan's theory can be explained under these main headings. The first is dynamics of personality. Here, Sullivan conceptualized personality as an energy system. So he considers personality as an energy system with energy existing either as tension or energy transformation. So what is tension? Tension is a potentiality for action that may or may not be experienced in awareness. Energy transformation, that is the action themselves. Now, energy transformation transform tension into either covert or overt behaviors and are aimed at satisfying needs and reducing anxiety. So energy transformation transform tension into either covert is hidden or overt is open behaviors and are aimed at satisfying the needs and reducing the anxiety. And Sullivan also recognized two types of tensions. We learned tension. What are two types of tension now? First is need. Second is anxiety. Needs usually result in productive actions. Yes. Needs are helpful or conjunctive when satisfied. Everybody has got basic needs, right? Anxiety. Anxiety leads to non-productive or disintegrative behaviors. Anxiety is disjunctive, interfering with the satisfaction of needs. Though you're satisfied with your needs, if you're anxious, what happens? It leads to disruption and disrupting interpersonal relations also. Due to what? Due to anxiety. Sullivan called anxiety the chief disruptive force in interpersonal relations. A complete absence of anxiety and other tensions is called euphoria. So absence of anxiety and other tension is called euphoria. Euphoria. Next, level of cognition. So first we learned dynamics of personality. Now levels of cognition. Level of cognition refers to ways of perceiving. What is cognition? We learned, right? That's the first subject we have, cognitive psychology. So what is it? It is the way you perceive, imagine, and conceive. Savilian recognized three levels of cognition or ways of perceiving things. How do you do that? Prototaxic level. What is it? Experiences on the prototaxic level are impossible to communicate. It includes sensations, thoughts, feelings, but no interferences or conclusions are drawn from these experiences. Newborn infants experience images mostly on a prototaxic level. So the child also perceives differently everything. But again, it is difficult for a mother or any parent or anybody to understand, right? What they are feeling, what they are thinking is difficult. It is impossible to communicate to the other person. We only feel that we know what they are trying to mean, but it's not true. The second is parataxic level. What is it? Parataxic experience as pre-logical. It consists of connecting causal relationship between events that occur at about the same time, but which are not logically related. Whenever a black cat comes my way, I face disaster. We see causal connection between experiences that have nothing to do with another. It could be the other way also. No, we are also coming in between the road, no, crossing cat's path. Very bad. Next, syntaxic level. What is syntaxic level now? Experiences that are consensually validated and that can be symbolically communicated. Here, the communication is easy through symbols. Logical order among experiences and enables people to communicate with one another. It is easy to communicate here. Highest level of cognitive thinking. You are able to speak out your mind or express your mind. Although all these three types of experience exist during the entire lifespan of a human, but the syntaxic experiences dominate the life of a normal individual. Of course, if you cannot express your thoughts, can you live? No. Next is dynamism. Energy transformation become organized as typical behavior patterns that characterize a person throughout a lifetime. Sullivan called these behavior patterns dynamism, a term that means about the same as traits or habit patterns. Most dynamisms serve the purpose of satisfying the basic needs of the organism. Two types of dynamism are distinguished by him. First is it is related to specific zones of the body only, which leads to the satisfaction of particular bodily needs like hunger, thirst. Next, it is related to tensions. That is disjunctive dynamism. Malevolence, that is negative interpersonal behavior. What is malevolence here? It is a hostile attitude of a person. Next is conjunctive dynamism, that is intimacy, that is positive interpersonal behavior. Third is isolating dynamism, that is lust, that is unrelated to interpersonal. Malevolence is the disjunctive dynamism of evil or hatred, characterized by the feelings of living among one's enemies. It originates around 2 to 3 when children's actions that earlier had brought about maternal tenderness are rebuffed, ignored, or met with anxiety and pain now. Those children who become malevolent have much difficulty giving and receiving tenderness or being intimate with other person. So if you're not happy in your life, can you make others happy in your life? No. Intimacy. It grows out of the earlier need for tenderness, but is more specific and involves a close interpersonal relationship between two people who are more or less of equal status here. Intimacy is an integrating dynamism that tends to draw out loving reactions from the other person, thereby decreasing anxiety and loneliness. So intimacy increases, so anxiety and loneliness decreases. On the other hand, lust is an isolating tendency, requiring no other person for its satisfaction. Autoerotic behavior hinders an innate relationship. It increases anxiety and decreases self-worth. So you have no self-worth when lust comes into the picture. Self-system. What is self-system? It is all of the security operations an individual used to defend against anxiety and ensure self-esteem. The self-system is a conjunctive dynamism, but because its primary purpose is to protect the self from anxiety, it tends to stifle the personality change. There are two types of security operations here. The first is dissociation, which includes impulses, desires, and needs that a person refuses to allow into awareness, that is in your dreams. Second is selective inattention, refusal to see things that one does not wish to see, that is by being conscious. Next, personification. What is personification? Beginning in infancy and continuing throughout the various developmental stages, people acquire certain images of themselves and others. These images called personification may be relatively accurate, or because they are colored by people's needs and anxiety, they may be grossly distorted or in misshape. These personifications are mental images that allow us to understand ourselves and the world in a better manner. So personification is an important aspect. There are three basic ways to see ourselves that Sullivan called the bad me, the good me, and the not me. This is interesting. The bad me. What is bad me? The bad me represent those aspects of the self that are considered negative and are therefore hidden from others, and possibly even the self, even you are not aware of it. It grows from experiences of punishment and disapproval in your life. So that bad me is growing. The good me. What is it? It is everything we like about ourselves. It results from experiences with reward and approval. The next is the not me. Represents all those things that are so anxiety provoking that we cannot even consider them a part of us. Like it exists, but you say, no, this is not me. I did not do this. This is not what I meant. This was not my intent. So you don't want to accept. The not me is kept out of awareness, kept out of conscious. So it is an unconscious state. By pushing it deep into the unconscious. Developmental epochs. Next topic. Savilian postulated 7 epochs or stages of development, each crucial to the formulation of human personality. And they take place at any time, but are more likely to occur during transition between stages. So let's quickly go through one by one. First is infancy, that is birth to 1 year. Of course, there is relief from anxiety. Child is not anxious, parents are anxious. Childhood, 1 to 5 years old. Again, parents are anxious. Learning to experience a delay in personal gratification without undue anxiety. Of course. Juvenile, 6 to 8 years old. Learning to form satisfactory pure relationship. Again, the child is not anxious. Parents are anxious. Pre-adolescence, 9 to 12 years old. Learning to form satisfactory relationship with persons of same sex. Initiating feeling of affection for another person. Next, early adolescence, 13 to 17 years old. Both are anxious, both parents and the child. Parents more anxious. Learning to form satisfactory relationship with persons of the opposite sex, developing a sense of identity. Next, late adolescence, 18 to 22. Establishing self-identity, experiencing satisfying relationships, working to develop a lasting, intimate, opposite sex relationship. Both parents and the child is anxious. Next, adulthood, 23 years old and on. Develops a consistent pattern of viewing the world at this age. Adult relationships and socialization become easier to attain in this age, and solid background of interpersonal conflicts usually results in anxiety for the child of 23-year-old and more. The struggles of adulthood include financial security, career, and family. So basically, the anxiety in the child starts from maybe early adolescence, but for parents, I think from the day one, it is always there. Next is evaluation. Despite Savilian's insights into the importance of interpersonal relations, his theory of personality and his approach to psychotherapy have lost popularity in recent years. and I don't know why I have that taken. In summary, his theory rates very low in falsifiability and biological influences, and low in ability to generate research. So research is not so good. Parsimony. Next is uniqueness. So low in uniqueness. So it is nothing unique. Average in capacity to organize knowledge, practical guide, like the way we are struggling, guide action, self-consistency, free choice, optimism, and causality. High on unconscious determinants. Very high on social influences. Done for the day. Any doubts so far? Ritika, could you stop recording?